Hello, this is Angelia, and you are listening to or watching the podcast, Why You Do What You Do, the podcast that talks about human development and psychology to try and help you figure out why you do what you do. And now last time we were talking about whether development, it was continuous or did it occur in stages. And we're going to pick back up on that. Mechanistic theories see development as continuous, like walking or crawling up a ramp. So they think it all has to come in steps, and this leads to this, leads to this, leads to this. These theories describe development as always governed by the same processes, allowing prediction of earlier behaviors from later ones. And, that's not always true. As we'll get into later on. But, that was their theory. Mechanistic theories focus on quantitative change. For example, changes in the frequency with which a response is made rather than changes in the kind of response. So they're worried about how much change. Like we used as an example about the toddler knocking the spoon off and the dog barking. After that happens a couple times in his mind, oh, when I knock the spoon off, the dog barks. And then one time he knocks it off and the dog doesn't bark. And then he's like, oh, that kind of messed up his theory. Organismic theories emphasize qualitative change. They see development as occurring in a series of distinct stages, like stair steps. At each stage, people cope with different kinds of problems and develop different kinds of abilities. Also that is not 100% accurate because, like I said, you can be going a certain way and something can derail you and you then take some steps back. And then you might not go you might go a different route. So, again, that's their theory. Each stage builds on the previous one and prepares the way for the next. And in development, that is something, that the pediatricians and child psychologists and everything look at. When they were X age, did they do this? Did they do that? Because they're looking for that, pattern. An emerging consensus. So now, they're coming to agreement on some things. As the study of human development has evolved, the mechanistic and organismic models have shifted in influence and support. Most of the early pioneers of the field, including Sigmund Freud, Erik Erikson, and Jean Piaget, favored organismic or stage approaches. And that's because of the way of the thinking, the time they were doing that. It's like this leads to this, and it's all straight and organized. We learn later on, not necessarily. However, the mechanistic view gained support during the 1960s with the popularity of learning theories derived from the works of John B. Watson. And we'll get on him a little bit later. Today, the pendulum was swung back part way. Again, as in most things in life, in psychology and human development studies, there is no 100% accurate thing. No theory is 100% accurate because there are so many variables in the development of an organism. There was a psychology teacher that I had who did electric shocks on goldfish. That was awful. But the goldfish learned if he went over a certain way, he would get an electric shock, even if there was food there. So, I felt like that's pretty cruel, really. But he learned if he waited and got his food over here, then he would not get the electric shock. So, as we develop also, if we are punished for being a certain way, we're not going to be that way. We're going to go this way and be different. And that's why, they talk about how children learn what they live. If you are being negatively reinforced, then that's going to lead you a different way. So there are so many variables that one straight up this to this to this to this is not the answer for everybody. And that's why in psychology we talk about, the law of averages, that there's no such thing as normal, because everyone has their own experience. And so there is no normal experience. There is an average experience. And some people fall this way and some people fall this way. So that's why, they've started to figure out, not everyone is going to have the cookie cutter development or the cookie cutter, mental health. It's just not reality. Quasi-organismic approaches centered on the biological basis of behavior are on the rise. Because, again, there is a biological component to your behavior. You inherited DNA from your parents. You inherited them from theirs and theirs and theirs and theirs. So what's in your DNA also is going to, come to the fore or not. And that's going to affect how you develop. You'll have to excuse me. I'm having allergy problems today. Got some itchy eyes and throat issues. My goodness. But instead of looking for broad stages, there is an effort to discover what specific kinds of behavior show continuity or lack of continuity, and what processes are involved in each. So, they're starting to study the actual behaviors. Has this been a pattern over the child's development, or has this not been a pattern over the child's development? And that can tell you some things about, whether this is just the way this child is, or if this is something that suddenly develops. Because, if the kid's going along fine, happy, and then suddenly derails and has, horrible bad attitude or is acting out, something happened, and you need to get to the bottom of that. Just as a consensus is emerging about how heredity and environment work together, many developmentalists are coming to a more balanced view of active versus passive development. So active, the things that are, active and that you play a part in your own development, and we all do to a certain extent. And then passive are, the things that you don't. It just kind of happens to you, and you just deal with it, the best you can. Like I said, there's a lot of components in, psychology and human development. So, hope you didn't think you were just going to tune in one day and learn everything there was to learn. Because you got disappointed, didn't you? It's gonna be an ongoing thing. There is wide agreement that influence is bidirectional. Children change their world even as it changes them. Because we all make decisions, and every decision you make affects your world. A baby girl born with a cheerful disposition is likely to get positive responses from adults, which strengthen her trust that her smiles will be rewarded and motivate her to smile more. And unfortunately, that's not always the case. But, the sweeter a person is, the more we do respond to them. Because, we're drawn to people who we think like us, and then we'll like them, So that's just an ongoing thing throughout your life, is if someone's nice and friendly to you, you're going to like that person more than someone who's not. A manager who offers constructive criticism and emotional support to subordinates is likely to elicit their openness and trust, as well as greater effort to produce. And I've had bosses like that who are just like super nice, and you want to do a good job for them because, they're being super nice to you. And even if they have to tell you something, you did something wrong or whatever, they're nice about, hey, this thing, You made a mistake. You did this wrong, and you're like, oh, so what was right? Or you figure out, what was right, and you do that because you want to make them happy because they're nice to you, and they're not, being mean or punitive. Some bosses think they have to yell and freak out and stuff, and that has the opposite effect of what they think it's going to have. I mean, there was a whole school of thought there for a while, especially amongst certain men's groups that think, no offense, fellas, but it was a fact. There were actual groups meeting at hotels and rooms that say, you have to be mean to succeed. You have to motivate your people by being cruel and mean to them. And they even had seminars on how to attract women by being mean to them. So, hopefully that school of thought, that sexist school of thought is gone. Good gosh, I hope so. But there were people who subscribed to these things. And I'm just going to tell you, you heard it here, it's not. The nicer you are to people, the better it's going to be for you. If you're yelling and screaming at people, they're going to leave. They're going to walk out. They might take it for a while, song goes, you can run on for a long time. But, sooner or later, people are going to be like, screw it, I've had enough of this. I'm not dealing with this anymore. I'll have another job. And they get out. So think about that before, you start yelling and screaming at people and, criticizing everything they do. Because that's going to leave you in the lurch. These positive responses, in turn, are likely to encourage people to keep using this managerial style because it works. Like I said, there was a place I worked there for 12 years because my boss was so nice to us. She'd hang out with us. She invited us to her house. We went to lunches with her and stuff like that. But because she was so nice to us, even if she had to tell us something that wasn't so good, she did it in such a nice way that we respected her and we liked her and we wanted to work for her. And, that's a good way to be. Theoretical perspectives. Despite the growing consensus on the basic issues just discussed, many investigators view development from differing theoretical perspectives. Like I said, lots of theories, and based on your own development, you might subscribe to this theory or that theory. So again, it's probably going to be a never-ending process in figuring out human behavior. Theories generally fall within these broad perspectives, each of which emphasizes different kinds of developmental processes. Because we have so many processes which, feed into our development. So there's just as many theories. These perspectives influence the questions researchers ask, the methods they use, and the ways they interpret data. Because like I said, your experience affects how you think about everything. Oh, my goodness. Itchy. Therefore, to evaluate and interpret research, it is important to recognize the theoretical perspective on which it is based. So, if you were becoming a psychologist, you would need to learn more and study more about this. I'm just giving you the general basics here so you can, understand the way of thinking and the theories about this or that. I'm not going to make you get into all that stuff, you're not going to get a PhD from me. And if you think you do, then, you can't get a license with it. So 5 major perspectives underline much influential theory and research on human development. Number 1 is psychoanalytic, which focuses on unconscious emotions and drives. Number 2 is learning, which studies observable behavior. Number 3 is cognitive, which analyzes thought processes. Number 4 is evolutionary and sociobiological, which considers evolutionary and biological underpinnings of behaviors. And 5, contextual, which emphasizes the impact of the historical, social, and cultural context. So those are the 5 things that they look at when they're trying to figure out, your development or what, psychological issue you might be having right now. Here's a general overview of the assumptions, central focus, and methods of each of these perspectives, and some leading theorists within each perspective who will be referred to throughout. So we're going to talk about some different theories and the person who came up with this theory. Like I said, I'm not going to dig you in that deep. I'm just going to give you the overview, the basics. Perspective 1, psychoanalytic. And I think we all know that's when you're going for analysis. You go to the psychologist's office or the psychiatrist's office. You know, some people still have you lay on a couch, but most of them not. You sit in a chair, that's fine. And you get psychoanalyzed. The psychoanalysis perspective views development as shaped by unconscious forces that motivate human behavior. So as you develop, you know, there are things, like I said, that disturb you. There are things that knock you off track. And these are the things that, you know, this particular theory of thought is trying to figure out. Sigmund Freud, a Viennese physician, developed psychoanalysis, a therapeutic approach aimed at giving patients insight into unconscious emotional conflicts. Because the theory was, if you can understand why you're doing this, it's easier for you to stop doing this. And that is true. There are people who go through life just ignorant, bad behavior, and they never stop because they don't understand why they're doing it. And that was Freud's goal, is like, if he could make the patient understand why you're doing what you're doing, then there can be intervention and you can change this behavior. Other theorists and practitioners, including Erik H. Erikson, have expanded and modified the psychoanalytic perspective. And then we're going to talk about Sigmund Freud's psychosexual development. I know we've seen all the Freud jokes and memes. You know, Freud was a little hung up on sex, and I ain't even going to get into why that might have been or what that was about. You know, Freud believed that people are born with biological drives that must be redirected so as to live in society. Because, you know, in the beginning, we were, you know, hominids who stood upright, and we were not so civilized. We were more animalistic, and we created this man-made society, and we created rules to govern this man-made society, and manners, etiquette, niceties, to get along in this society. So Freud felt like the more you restrict a being, the more problem they're going to have with, you know, their natural drives wanting to be coming out or sublimated in some way. He proposed that personality is formed in childhood, as children deal with life. And they also will have unconscious conflicts between inborn urges and the requirements of their civilized life. Because, you know, kids, they don't understand the rules and the manners and all that stuff like that. They just want to do what they want to do. So basically, they are then punished by the adults around them and told, that's not right. You can't do that. You need to act this way. So, of course, that's injurious to your psyche, because you're being told you're not okay. What you're doing is not okay. So that's an injury to your psyche, and then you have to figure out how to navigate, you know, around that in the world now. These conflicts occur in an unvarying sequence of 5 maturationally based stages of psychosexual development. Excuse me. In which sexual or sensual pleasures shift from one body zone to another, from the mouth to the anus, and then to the genitals. And this was his theory. And like I said, I'm not going to get into that. We all know little toddlers and babies, they mouth everything. Personally, I never had any problems or experiencing anything with that other end. But we do have to have potty training, so that may be a thing. And then usually you're not experimenting with the down below until you get a little bit older. At each stage, the behavior that is the chief source of gratification or frustration changes from feeding to elimination and eventually to sexual activity. So we are concerned majorly with different activities in different stages of our life. Like, being moved to a bottle. And then you have to use a cup. And that's going to be frustrating. Then you have to move to eating food and holding your own spoon, your own fork, learn how to cut with a knife. And, there might be some playing around with parts of yourself. Who knows? But you have to go from wearing a diaper where somebody's cleaned you up, you don't worry about it, to training on a small potty. And then you might move to the big potty, or you might start out on the big potty. They have those little seats that sit on the big potty. So that's an adjustment. And that's something that you have to change. And your psyche and your body likes homeostasis. It likes you to be the same, So anytime we're changing things up, that's going to upset the balance, and it's going to make a dent, in the psyche. There was a person who said, if you let a child just grow up doing everything they want to do, they would be the most adjusted child ever, but unfortunately they would probably be the worst behaved child ever. Freud considered the first 3 stages, those of the first few years of life, crucial. And they are to your development, because you learn what you live, and like I said, your first interactions are with your mother, father, and other people in your family, and those are going to form the foundation of what you're going to build upon as you go through life. He suggested that if children receive too little or too much gratification in any of these stages, they are at risk of fixation. And you know what that is, where you dwell on things. An arrest in development that can show up in adult personality. So he thought, if you had oral fixation when you're little, that would show up in your adult personality. Excuse me. For example, babies whose needs are not met during the oral stage, when feeding is the main source of sensual pleasure, may grow up to become nail biters or smokers, or to develop bitingly critical personalities. And I'm sure we all know people are nail biters and smokers, and that may or may not be a thing. And then we get into the caricature type theories where they might have biting personalities. That's not right. I think we know that. But there was a lot of that. There was a lot of inference back in the day where they could attribute things to this, that, or the other things. That the others make sense. Biting personality, maybe not so much. More than likely, the biting personality person was criticized a lot as a child, so they became critical. Just how that probably went down. A person who, as a toddler, had too strict toilet training may be fixated at the anal stage, when the chief source of pleasure was moving the bowels. And I'm not going to get into that other than to say there are schools of thought who believe, that might be why some people turn to sodomy. And also, we know now that men have a prostrate gland, and when they go to the bathroom, that can be, stimulated, and it also is a release. So you know, on that one. Such a person may have a constipated personality. Again, you know, if a person didn't have a great personality and they held back a lot, it's probably because they were criticized a lot as a child and they were scared, you know, to kind of reach out of their comfort zone. Obsessively clean and neat or rigidly tied to schedules and routines. And now children need some of that. But a person who is too obsessive, they might have had some fastidiousness problems early on and they got chewed out for it. So they kind of, went that way. Or the person may be defiantly messy. And there are people who are defiantly messy. I mean, if you're messy, you're only hurting yourself. Because if you're dirty, you're going to attract bugs, you're going to have germs, and you're going to get sick. And so really, if you're messy, you're only hurting yourself. According to Freud, a key event in psychosexual development occurs in the phallic stage of early childhood. Boys develop sexual attachment to their mothers and girls to their fathers, and they have aggressive urges toward the same-sex parent, whom they regard as a rival. Now, they talked about these, the Oedipal complex, based on the old Oedipus story from Greece, the Electra complex. And generally, if you are a heterosexual, then you are, more thinking about that. I don't want to mention names, but one of my own sons, when he was 4 years old, said, I'll be happy when I grow up and you can be my wife. And I had to explain to him that that was not going to happen, that when, you can't marry your mom. And when he grew up, he would find a nice girl to marry. And, we were never, and he was very sad. He cried, So children, in their innocence, just kind of think that's a thing, if, they're attracted to the opposite sex parent. And that's kind of their first, romanticized thinking about the opposite sex, or, maybe the same sex. Everyone's different. Children eventually resolve their anxiety over these feelings by identifying with the same-sex parent and move into the latency stage of middle childhood, a period of sexual calm. And, that's when, boys starting to want to be like dad. Girls start to want to be like mom, if that's the way they are. And they start trying to do more things with the same-sex parent. They become socialized, develop skills, and learn about themselves and society. So when you hang out with the same-sex parent, you're hanging out with her friends and her relatives, aunts, grandmas, whoever. And you're learning what it means to be, your sex. And that might be something you're interested in. It might not be something you're interested, because, again, everybody's different. And you develop skills. Like my grandma taught me how to sew, and my other grandma taught me how to crochet. And, those were things that in their day meant something. They were a big deal. We don't do that so much nowadays. I still do these things, though, because, it was a connection that I made with them, and so it actually means something to me. And society as a whole. What is expected of you in your role as a woman or as a man? And those roles change, again, talking about in the time period you're born in. Those roles change in the time period that you're born in. The genital stage, the final one, lasts throughout adulthood. And of course, I don't even have to explain that, do I? And if I do, maybe you need to go back and talk to your mom, dad, or your sex ed teacher. As an adult, you're going to want to have sex. That's just a fact of life. Now, it's up to you. who you do it with and when you do it, and where you do it, that's up to you. The sexual organ is repressed during latency now resurfaces to flow in socially approved channels, which Freud defined as heterosexual relations with persons outside the family of origin. Because then they considered homosexuality abnormal, but like I said, it happens in nature. It's rare, but it does happen. So if it happens in nature, then it's natural. Again, outside the family of origin, that became a thought back in the beginning. Like in Egypt, you had sisters and brothers getting married. Back in, European nobility, you had cousins getting married. I have cousins, who are nobility and royalty, and I'm cousins to both sides of the married folks. So, we want to dig any further to figure that one out. That's just how they did it then, you marry your cousin. Or I read in one, I think in the Tudor times, you would marry your father's, if you were a girl, you would marry your father's oldest relative. If you're a boy, you'd marry your mother's, oldest relative. And I'm like, oh, wow. I don't think so. And Freud proposed 3 hypothetical parts of the personality: the id, the ego, and the superego. And we're going to talk about that next time. So that's all for now. I hope that helped you maybe figure out a little more about why you do what you do. Until next time.